That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, this is going to conclude our underrated player series where we are looking at DLF ADP and comparing that to our dynasty rankings. And honestly, I think this is probably the best video to conclude with, because if you are looking at our rankings and comparing them to ADP, there are some pretty massive gaps. I mean, Deandre Hopkins is going to be the perfect example. Of course, we'll talk about him a little bit later on, but here in ADP, I'm looking at a wide receiver that's wide receiver 29, right in front of Rashad Bateman and Allen Robinson. And in our rankings, I have him up there, wide receiver 19. Like we're going to have a lot to talk about. But of course, before we get into it, please go down there, drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, and leave a comment letting me know some wide receivers that you think are undervalued. I've been trying to get to as many comments as I possibly can as of late. And as a quick side note, of course, if you ever want to go and get into a draft this offseason that maybe isn't Dynasty, but if you're having that redraft itch, you can do that on Underdog Fantasy, where they have a ton of best ball drafts. I mean, go hop in one of those, and when you use promo code FLOCK and make your first deposit, they'll match you dollar for dollar up to $100. Of course, you can find the link in the description of the video. And I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into this. And let's start it off with a wide receiver that, I'm not going to lie, I did not expect him to be anything close to this mark in his ADP. Cooper Kupp. I have Cooper Kupp as our dynasty wide receiver 4. I understand that he's older. Yes, Cooper Kupp right now, like if you pull up his age, you compare it to some of the other players at the very top, which is kind of funny because, as a quick side note, Cooper Kupp was actually drafted in 2017. This is the same class that you had Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, 25 years old this offseason. And Cooper Kupp should be about 29 by the time next season starts. But coming off of, I want to say, the best wide receiver season of all time. I know you have Megatron, but I mean, if you look at what Cooper Kupp was able to do in the playoffs as well, maybe I'm too young. Maybe I just have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm going to say the best wide receiver season of all time. You're looking at his DLF ADP as the wide receiver 10. Now, I understand, like I said, he's older than a lot of these options. You're looking at him compared to someone like DK Metcalf. I mean, DK Metcalf's the perfect example. He's going at wide receiver 7 compared to Cooper Kupp at wide receiver. Why are you paying up for age like that? What we've discussed time and time again is those age drop-offs, those age cliffs occurring for wide receivers a lot later than what you were going to have at the running back position. And let's look at some wide receivers that have fallen off recently. I think a perfect example would be someone like Julio Jones. Now, Julio Jones, I mean, I would say his overall career probably better than Cooper Kupp. I think we can all agree with that. But if you're looking at how the two wide receivers win and how those players should be able to transition later on in their NFL careers, how is someone ever going to transition better than Cooper Kupp as a wide receiver once he gets to 31, 32 years old? This is a player that wins with finesse. This is a player that wins off just his route running capability and his hands. Now, of course, Cooper Kupp is a fantastic athlete, but do you believe that Cooper Kupp is Tyreek Hill, and that's why Cooper Kupp is successful at the next level? Do you think that Cooper Kupp is just the fastest player on the field and nobody's going to be able to keep up with him, and that's how he goes out there and has 2,000 receiving yards in a year? No, that's not it. Cooper Kupp's able to just wiggle around, find the holes in the zone, and be able to run crisp routes to generate separation and win at the catch point. Now, that is going to transition. I mean, that is going to translate into late career success, very similar to someone like Larry Fitzgerald. So I'm just not worried about a player like Cooper Kupp, even though he is older. I understand it. I'm going to still have him as an elite wide receiver in Dynasty. This is what we always talk about. I'm willing to hold on to those wide receivers too long and sell those running backs too early. Give me Cooper Kupp. We'll talk about another veteran wide receiver in a little bit, but let's go over to someone that was drafted in 2018, the year after Kupp. Let's go over to Calvin Ridley. In my opinion, there's no better value right now in Dynasty Fantasy Football than Calvin Ridley. I mean, if you're looking at his DLF ADP, he is currently going behind Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, Terry freaking McLaurin, and Devonta Smith. This is a player that last year was a first round pick in redraft formats. Now, of course, Calvin Ridley was disappointing at the beginning of the season, and then before he left football to deal with mental health. Now, I would say, of course, I have no idea what the hell is going on with Calvin Ridley. I don't know what happened last year, but if he was in such a bad place where he felt that he needed to leave football, probably a reason he wasn't that good in the first 3 or 4 weeks, however long he was there. I don't even want to look at his production of what we had this past season. But if you look at Calvin Ridley 2 years ago in games that Julio Jones played along, it doesn't matter how you cut it. I don't even want to be looking at the Julio Jones on-off splits. Calvin Ridley was elite regardless. But if you were going to be looking at the points per game for Calvin Ridley, what you actually need to be doing is you need to be removing the games where Calvin Ridley didn't play 50% of the snaps. And if you remove those games, Calvin Ridley was actually the wide receiver 2 in 2020, only behind Davante Adams. Even if you just go from the entire season standpoint, you go, you know what? It's not fair to remove the games where Calvin Ridley played less than 50% of the snaps, yada, 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 for whatever your reason may be. Calvin Ridley still was the wide receiver 4 on a points per game standpoint in weeks 1 through 16. That's including a 0-point performance in week 4 where he left with an injury. That's including him leaving week 8 early. You remove those 2 weeks, he is neck and neck with Davante Adams in 2020, battling it out for the wide receiver 1 overall. And if you're looking at our dynasty rankings, we are going to have Calvin Ridley as the wide receiver 15. Honestly, F it. I'd let y'all bully me over there on Patreon to put DJ Moore ahead of Calvin Ridley and bully me into taking DJ Moore over Calvin Ridley this past mock draft, but in my heart of hearts, Calvin Ridley's the better player. I mean, I know that DJ Moore is a lot younger. They obviously were the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 of that 2018 draft class. I mean, you had Calvin Ridley coming out after 3 years at Alabama, but he got to Alabama very late. I believe he didn't break out until 20 years old at Alabama. I don't know why he was in high school so long. I mean, I know that you have Calvin Ridley at 27 years old. You have DJ Moore about to be 25. Calvin Ridley has shown us the ceiling that very few players in fantasy have, and you're getting him at 20. I'm not worried about wide receivers being 27. He's in his prime. I know that he may be in a different situation this upcoming season. I know he wants out of Atlanta. Is Atlanta that great of a situation to begin with? I mean, I'm looking at our last mock draft. You have Calvin Ridley at the 508. I was sitting there and I was just being tortured with the thought in that live stream of who am I going at the 506? We had DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin all in the same tier. If you pull up our Patreon rankings, we have them at wide receiver 14, 15, and 16. I ended up letting y'all bully me in to going with DJ Moore. I think that was the wrong decision. I'm going Calvin Ridley, but this isn't even really a conversation between those two guys, because if you pull up Calvin Ridley's DLF ADP, he's the wide receiver 20. He's behind Elijah Moore. He's behind Keenan Allen. He's behind Terry McLaurin. Like, how are we comparing him to Terry McLaurin when Terry McLaurin is yet to put up a top 12 season at the position? When Terry McLaurin is also, I mean, that same age bracket that you have with Calvin Ridley. They are all wide receivers that are not going to ascend in value anymore. You're buying them for their current production to ride it out. It's like you're buying a dividend-paying stock. You're figuring out if you're going to get enough production over the next 5 years for this price point to make sense. And with Calvin Ridley, we have seen that he has access to a ceiling that no other player in this same range does. And when he does play, if we look, I mean, just past this 2021 season, he has a floor higher than these other players as well. I don't understand the hesitation with Calvin Ridley. I don't understand how he's falling this late in startup drafts. I mean, I would love to go out there. I mean, Treylon Burks gets selected at the 301 in our last mock draft. I would love to trade Treylon Burks for Calvin Ridley. Like, if we trade Treylon Burks, a 2023 second round pick, for Calvin Ridley in a 2023 first, which I know you probably can't do that in a real league, but based on this ADP data, based on this mock draft, you probably can. this Calvin Ridley value, probably the best value in Dynasty overall, not even just at the wide receiver position. Okay, so if Calvin Ridley is not the best value in Dynasty right now, let's go over to a wide receiver that has been around for a very long time, that has been at the top of the game for a very long time, to the point where it is straight up boring. I mean, you're not going to hear a lot of analysis of this player because there's not a lot to talk about. DeAndre Hopkins. Now, with DeAndre Hopkins right now in DLF ADP, going behind Amari Cooper, Brandon Ayuk, Amara St. Brown, Chase Claypool, Jerry Jeudy, Michael Pittman, Elijah Moore. I mean, if you're looking at our Dynasty rankings, I have DeAndre Hopkins in the same tier as Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman, and Hollywood Brown. And this is a wide receiver that I think very similar to what we were saying with Cooper Kupp. This sentiment almost holds true to a further extent with DeAndre Hopkins, because with Hopkins, this is a player that does not win with elite athleticism. This is a player that wins based on his ability for those jump balls. He is probably the best wide receiver in the NFL when it comes to winning at the catch point. And if we are just going to take a step back and kind of ignore this past season, I understand it's his first year in God knows how long, going less than 1,000 receiving yards. It's DeAndre Hopkins' first year really ever missing time. The most time he's missed in a season beforehand. I mean, let me count this out. 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. He went 9 seasons. He almost went a decade with missing one game. One game. Every year, 160 targets. 160 targets. Let me pull this up and go year by year. 127, 192, 151, 173, 163, 150. And I'm not going to lie, I was slightly concerned whenever he got traded to Arizona in 2020 based on the spread system that Cliff Kingsbury runs and how many wide receivers see snaps and run routes. And I was worried that DeAndre Hopkins possibly wasn't going to get to 10 targets a game, that DeAndre Hopkins wasn't going to go out there and see just 160 targets, 30% of his team's target share, as you've come to be used to with DeAndre Hopkins. Yet that happened. 160 targets, 16 games played in 2020 with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, 1,400 receiving yards. Last year, DeAndre Hopkins comes out 1,400 receiving yards, and people are acting like it didn't happen. I mean, 2020, he was literally the wide receiver 5 on a per game basis. Now, of course, DeAndre Hopkins, misses a significant amount of time this season. DeAndre Hopkins deals with a multitude of injuries. The rib injury of sorts, based on all reports, made it sound like DeAndre Hopkins shouldn't have even been playing. And you would imagine a player that has only missed one game through 9 years is going to do everything that he can to put himself on the field and may not be 100%, but to play through it. That's exactly what you had with DeAndre Hopkins. The production took a hit because of so, but I don't necessarily think this should be something we're projecting going forward. At this moment, DeAndre Hopkins, 29 years old. I think that with Hopkins, he should have one more year of top 12 production in the tank alongside an elite level wide receiver. You'll have no AJ Green on the outside this upcoming season. You'll have a 34-year-old, a 33, 32, however the hell old he is, Zach Ertz. You have an extremely old tight end there that has seen a drop off in efficiency to an extreme over the past 3 years of his NFL career. You have a free agent in Christian Kirk that will probably be brought back, but we don't know for the time being. So DeAndre Hopkins really the only guy guaranteed to be here with Kyler Murray this upcoming season. And if you look at the splits with Kyler Murray, with and without DeAndre Hopkins this past year, remember, Kyler himself lost a decent amount of time halfway through the season. If you look at the splits of this offense with DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray playing versus without, it was a night and day difference with the impact DeAndre Hopkins had while he was on the field. So this clearly illustrates that DeAndre Hopkins did not see the drop-off in his level of play this past season. It was more centered around the injuries that he had, the time that he had missed, and I think that this is something that you should not come to expect from DeAndre Hopkins going forward. I know it's crappy timing. I understand he's 29 years old now. So a lot of people think that all of a sudden this is guaranteed to become a trend. But with Hopkins, I want to take a step back. I want to look at the super long sample that we have of DeAndre Hopkins being a dominant wide receiver and ignore the 1 year that we have of DeAndre Hopkins just getting that downtick based on injury. Situation should be stable going forward. Like I can't see living in a world where you would prefer Chase Claypool over DeAndre Hopkins in Dynasty. I understand that Claypool is very young, but this season where DeAndre Hopkins dealt with these injuries, he had a higher points per game than Chase Claypool has ever come close to in his NFL. Give me Hopkins. Give me Hopkins. He's playing with Kyler. He's playing with the top 10 quarterback on top of this. I think that he's going to probably be my most owned wide receiver from a best ball perspective this offseason. Unsure about Dynasty, but I'm definitely going to be trading for him where I have those contending rosters. And now our next guy on this list is going to be my favorite player in terms of just the cost to acquire for a second, because I think you can get this wide receiver for a second and a third round rookie pick. You're not going to be able to do so with Calvin Ridley. No, nobody's trading Calvin Ridley for a second. Nobody's trading DeAndre Hopkins for a second. But Hollywood Brown is a player that I think you can go out there and get. And we talked about this in the mock draft where I believe almost every mock draft this offseason, I've gone out there and I selected Hollywood Brown. This past draft, I ended up taking him, I believe, at the 706. And I took him in aggressive range. I went out there and I reached for Hollywood. I took him ahead of Keenan Allen. I took him ahead of Mike Evans. I took him ahead of Amari Cooper. I took him ahead of Michael Thomas. I went out of my way. I paid a price that most people aren't willing to do. And I don't feel bad about it whatsoever. Because if you're looking at Hollywood Brown this past year, I don't know what else you could ask for. Of course, you had the drop-off near the end of the season. But what else happened near the end of the year? What happened after the bye week for the Baltimore Ravens? You had Lamar Jackson going down. You had Lamar Jackson going down in week 10. So if we look at weeks 1 through 9 for Hollywood Brown, let's just go 1 through 9 on a points per game basis. Hollywood Brown averaged 18.8 points per game. Now, if we go and we compare this to everybody else and where 18.8 points per game would stack up this past year, I'm going to remove Antonio Brown because with Antonio Brown, you're looking at like a 4-game sample. That's not fair. With Hollywood, if he managed that 18.8 points per game, which he did through the first 9 weeks of the season, this is a wide receiver that would have been the wide receiver 6, only behind Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. Now, not to mention that Hollywood Brown is a very young wide receiver at the same time. This is someone that was drafted in that same draft class as Deebo Samuel, same draft class as A.J. Brown, Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf. He's only 24 years old. Now, of course, with Hollywood, this is going to be a player that's the exact opposite of Cooper Kupp, the exact opposite of DeAndre Hopkins. You have to be worried about how he's going to age, given the fact that he does win mainly off his athletic profile and the speed that he possesses. But are we going to be worried about that when he's 24? Or are we going to be worried about that when he's 28? He's stepping into the prime of his career. You are not going to have Sammy Watkins here this upcoming season. You clearly have seen Miles Boykin, Devin Duvernay. I'm sorry, Jan. Hopefully you do not hear this. Flame out in Baltimore. So you're almost just looking at Rashad Bateman and Hollywood Brown being neck and neck. And with Rashad Bateman, there's really nothing to be seen of confidence. Right now, if you're looking at Dynasty ADP, Hollywood Brown is down there as the wide receiver 27. The wide receiver 27. Him and Rashad Bateman are going within 5 picks of each other. So they're essentially going back to back in a lot of these drafts. I would say that Hollywood had a similar profile coming out of college, that Hollywood has demonstrated that ability at the NFL level, where if you're looking at Bateman, on the other hand, Bateman flashed as a rookie, but why is he anything close to Hollywood with projections going forward? With Rashad Bateman, he had 54 targets this past season. This was, from a per game perspective, the wide receiver 74, right behind Braxton Berrios. I'm expecting that Hollywood's going to continue to be the wide receiver 1. Of course, this is behind Mark Andrews, who's the true number 1 receiving threat option in this offense. but he can be an efficient player. The touchdown rate is going to come down. I'm expecting that instead of him being a top 6 wide receiver going forward, he's probably going to be a little bit closer to a mid wide receiver 2. But if he is going as a wide receiver 3 right now in Dynasty, whenever he's coming off of a wide receiver 1 season, essentially with his starting quarterback at 24 years old, who's a better value? Why is he going behind Chase Claypool? Why is he going behind Amara St. Brown? Why is he going behind Jerry Jeudy? Why is he going behind Michael Pittman? Why is he going behind Mike Evans? If you're looking at our Dynasty rankings, instead of having him at wide receiver 27, I have Hollywood Brown at wide receiver 20. Now, I think that's all I got for y'all. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I hope I get to see you out with the video tomorrow.